So I got a good buddy. He's about my age, and kind of weird background story. Very successful, lots of assets. Was actually a professional poker player for years, but because he did, 15 years of making insane money playing poker, doesn't exactly have the resume to walk into working at a hedge fund, even though he's got degrees in actuarial sciences and he's like a math geek and he's basically all the stereotypes that you're picturing of a professional kind of like mathematician poker player. So he kind of just looked at a bunch of different job fields and he's like, oh, insurance is kind of the gift that keeps on giving. If you can get a great agency off the ground, or I can use some of my assets to go buy an agency of a guy who's retiring, I've kind of got a, book of business in perpetuity, but he's like, I've got to learn the business side of it, the sales side, the closing side of it. So, if you think about it, he's a 40-year-old guy with a wife and a kid and life experience. And, he's working with a bunch of these 20-year-olds that are college dropouts and they're all making $12 an hour. And he's like, hey, naturally, some of these kids are better salespeople, quote unquote, than me. They're smoother on the phone. They have a better, slicker vernacular, right? Like if we go to a bar, of course he's happily married, but if we went to a bar, they would be the ones that would pick up on the girls. He's like, but nobody's going to outwork me. Like nobody's going to see the dots of connecting. Hey, maybe the CRM should do this so we can send out, 10,000 text messages a month instead of 1,000 text messages a month. And like, just nobody's going to outwork me and make calls because this is like a profession that I chose, not something that I'm just trying out. But he's also getting really frustrated with his closing rate, right? Because he's like, he's got the person, he's explaining, he's a good educator. He has, unlike all the other kids in the office, he has home insurance and life insurance policies and health insurance. But he's like, I just can't get them to sign on the line, which is dotted. So without knowing him and knowing that if he was talking to you, he would tell you, I'm kind of the classic introvert. I'm kind of like the nerdy mathematician. Like I need my flavor to break out and be able to be a salesperson. What book would you recommend, or seminar or process, or, because if you told the guy, hey, I need you to spend 3 extra hours a day doing X, he'll spend 6 extra hours a day doing X, but he just needs to know what X is.
Yeah. So that's kind of the epitome of the coaching industry in a nutshell, right there. I guess. So I'll try to keep it as quintessential as I can. A couple really great, for someone that's just getting started in sales. I think it's Zig Ziglar's little red book of sales, something like that, little black book of sales.
Yep.
That's a great place to start. Another one that's made a big difference in my sales career, even though it wasn't specifically involved in negotiation as much. There was an aspect that helped there. Was Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, right? And it's incredible. And what it really did for me was really start to flip my understanding and my perspective on hey, how can I get the client to understand where I'm coming from, what's happening here? And more so also on the other side of the coin, do I understand my client's needs at a high enough level? Can I hear what they're saying, even though they may not be saying it? They're asking a certain question. The words may be one thing, but what are they actually getting at? What data point are they looking for by asking that question based on our interactions, where they are in the process, et cetera. Within that, I think those would probably be 2 pretty good places to start as far as more formal learning or things than that. There's a ton of different sales trainers that are online. I like Grant Cardone for a lot of his real estate advice. I'm not a huge fan of some of the sales tactics, kind of old school and called, a little pushy, I'm going to say in some ways. What I find with some people, it works most of the time, is just to get curious around what your prospects actually want. There's a reason why they called you, right? There's a reason why you're having the conversation to begin with, which means they actually want something, or they're curious around some outcome.
Right. If they're on the phone for more than 2 minutes, they're willing to listen to something.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you can learn to frame things in a perspective where it's like, hey, like this is in your best interest, right? Or hey, here's what I would recommend based on this, right? And you go beyond, oh yeah, cool. Your car insurance is $250 a month. Okay, cool. Sign here. I'll send docs. Blah blah blah. Whatever. Especially in insurance, what I find is that you get a lot of people that are just strictly price shopping, but your best clients, the people you make the most off of, that you build a long-term relationships with, which what everybody wants, they care about different things than your average consumer does. So, right. So can you take someone from where they are now to their desired end emotions around that particular subject? Really is, in my opinion, what sales is building that bridge between those two things.
Yeah. So here's an interesting dilemma. And I ruminate back and forth between this, of the idea of, price versus service. Right. And I get it. Like, I'm the person who will pay an ungodly amount for convenience. Right. So if I go to buy a car and they say, hey, just so you know, as part of being part of Dodge Ram East Coast here or whatever, we have a shuttle service. We're gonna actually come pick up the truck from you when there's service needed. Like anything they're gonna do to make my life easier, I'm just going to pay full price for the truck. Cause like, I just want to I want to get out of there. I don't want to negotiate for 6 hours to save $2,500. And they've sold this idea of service after the sale. And I think, insurance agents, financial planners, people that have a follow-up relationship can do that more easily. Some of us, like myself, that sell a mortgage and, maybe people that sell a physical product, it's like, yeah, you can kind of work that into the conversation, but the reality is the consumer knows the truth of like, hey, I'm looking for a 6 instead of a 6.25% rate. And let's be honest, like after I own the house, I don't really need you. So, I have an interesting take on, where do you sell the service, the relationship, the person, whatnot, if you're selling product, So for example, you were mentioning when we just started, you'll work with some people in the construction industry. And for those of us that haven't done a lot of construction, we think the construction's done and it's done. Now, anybody who's ever owned a house knows there's follow-up calls and there's service and things change. And then you decide you want to, redesign things. But for people that are selling a product that's kind of finite, it's done, there's not a long tail relationship. How can they also maybe tell that story of like, hey, I don't have to be the low cost leader because I provide great service. And they're like, well, who cares? I want the commodity. Like I need the lowest price. Where are you coaching in that realm or maybe not really at all?
Great question. So I think that one of the things I'm a huge fan of anytime in a sales relationship is not only framing expectations and framing every conversation that you're going to have, but also being extraordinarily direct with people, right? So I tell a lot of my clients, look, you want to get out in front of objections and handle them from a position of strength versus a position of reactivity than that. And so, for example, if you're not going to be the cheapest person in town, then don't say, oh, well, somebody else might be able to do it for less. But it's like, no, Ms. Jones, I'm never going to be the cheapest person in town because I take great pride in the quality of my work. And my goal is that you love our service so much that by the time we're done here, you can't wait to introduce me to every single one of your friends. We're going to have a quality check for you every 2 years. We're going to come out and do an inspection for free. If there's anybody else that you'd like to introduce us to, our goal is just to earn your referral by the time this project is done, right within that. And because of that, we're not going to be cheap because, good things aren't cheap and cheap things aren't good. And I care too much about my quality and my service to do that to you, right? To be the cheapest one in town. I never want to be in a race to the bottom, right? Within that.
Totally agree. And there's a nice guy right down the street who's going to do it for $10 cheaper. So when people get to that point, do you just let them go and move on to the next prospect?
You're not going to win every single one over, but sometimes you can change them a little bit, questions along the lines of, hey, can I ask you a question, Ms. Jones? Like, if somebody else came along and offered to do the same project for $300 cheaper, is that something that you just did an absolute yes? Is that a deal breaker for you at this point? Because sometimes I'll be like, well, they said they could do it for that. And it's like, okay, is that a make or break thing for this particular project? Well, no. It's like, okay, well, can I show you why I think we're more than worth another $300 compared to anybody else that's out there?